Okay, so here we're gonna have a real quick, straight to the point video. No fancy intro, just right to it. We've got a 49 Willys pickup. It had the original Ross steering in it with a 283 engine, but everything else was original. Had a very bad wobble in it, also called a wobble of death. So I figured, well, I've got it apart, I'm gonna do everything steering. I'm gonna upgrade not just what fixed the wobble, but also make tighter steering. So I wanted to keep the stock steering column and steering wheel. That's just a temporary steering wheel to hold it together while I'm working on it. And then I'll swap it with the original, with the right horn button and everything. So from the inside, there's nothing different here. The only change is that I've cut this steering tube down. I'll show you on the outside, but it needs added support because it's cut off on the outside. So here is a bracket, a floor mount bracket that swivels to fit the size of your, or the angle that you need. It's bolted right to the floor. I bought that one from Herm, the overdrive guy. He's in Washington. There's actually a few really awesome parts on here that I bought from Herm. I'd highly recommend talking to him. The other thing that I liked about his stuff is I converted this to disc brakes because of my wobble. I shimmed it to spec several times. I even went over spec. I kept having the wobble, couldn't seem to figure it out. What it wound up being is the drums. These things come with very thin, weak drums. They're very easy to bend, especially if you go to bigger tires. So disc brakes solves the problem. I'll create another video with all the part numbers on that. But Herm lets you, he's got this part here he makes. It allows you to keep your closed knuckle steering. I have the closed knuckle steering with the double gussets right here, which is the strongest one they made, the one that people want. But the downfall is most of the kits, I think maybe all the kits, require a flat top up here to mount it to give you the extra tie rod in. But Herm makes this part where you can keep your closed knuckles, uses an existing hole, just a longer tie rod end with an added one for your steering arm. So you can buy that from Herm, the overdrive guy. He's awesome. I also bought the tie rod, both tie rods for the steering and the one that connects between the two knuckles. So over here is what I did on the steering arm, or the steering linkage. You can see here where I've cut it off. I cut off the end of the tube. I bought that bronze bushing from Herm to keep it centered. I've also added an additional bearing inside there that's really not necessary. And I cut it probably a little too long. Herm recommended shorter, and I probably wish I would have done that, but it's in now. So basically on the end of the steering column, it's cut off about right to here. You do not want to exceed this line at all, because if you do, the U-joint will bind right there. So basically I cut a hole, or I drilled a hole in the end of the steering shaft. I drilled out, these come with bolts, but there's not a lot of clearance here for the clutch. As this goes back and forth right here, this rod will come very close to here at some points and possibly bind with the bolt head or the nut. So I drilled mine out and tapped it and put a flush mount Allen bolt and basically locked it in with Loctite on both sides. Is basically two, I guess they're also called set screws, but basically it's a set screw with an Allen hole in the middle, and they both go about almost to the center. and they're locked in with Loctite. And then I did the same thing all the way down. Every bolt hole, each point of contact has 2 bolts. I went flush on all of them. I still need to add my set screw on this one. This one is actually drilled into the rod. This one is just going to be flush against it to keep it tight. So what we've got is this steering rod here is called a double D 1-inch steering rod. It's expandable. It makes it, you can make it longer or shorter by basically slides right there, and then you tighten it up with that set screw. It comes as one rod though. I cut mine in half and then some. So I've got a piece of it from this U-joint to this second U-joint. And then I'll be holding this in place with this Heim joint to keep it from binding, because that's a lot of joints. It will create a problem if you don't use a Heim joint. So here again, flush, drilled and tapped. And then basically 1, 2, 3 U-joints to the steering box. That allows you to get in tight underneath the clutch mechanism that comes on these Willys. There's not a lot of space here to work with, which is why I did it this way. Herm sells a kit that holds a bracket that holds this steering box on, but I couldn't get it to work because of my clutch. So I basically bolted it to the frame instead of his bracket. I made these bolt holders and basically welded it right to the frame. And that's just basically a piece of C-notch steel and a piece of angle iron. I set the bolt in there, welded them together loose enough to where I could still turn it, then welded it to the frame, lined it all up, and welded all 3 into place. It's super strong. It's already boxed in at the other side of this, and then the steering box itself is just actually adding more strength. So to hold this Heim joint in, basically this is what it looks like. It's a 1-inch Heim joint to fit over this double D steering shaft. I've got a nut on one side to stop, to basically align it, and then I made this bracket by just holding up a piece of cardboard and lining it up to see what size it needed to be, and then I cut it out and traced it onto my metal. And that metal is the same thickness as the frame. So basically what I'm gonna do, it's gonna slide up on here, up against that jam nut, and then I'm gonna put another nut on the other side of it after I weld all this into place to lock it in. So basically I'll weld the bottom of the bracket to the frame. I left the top a little bit long on purpose so I could have something to weld against, so I don't have a lot of room to work with. So basically this is what it will look like. That little piece right here I just slid in there. I'll weld that to that piece and it will lock it all in. And I've got my Zerk fitting where I can still get to it. It still clears, and this will prevent the steering from binding because of the 3 U-joints. And that's pretty much it. I bought my U-joints from Herm, the overdrive guy. I did add that 3rd one in there. I bought that at Borgerson. But he pretty much sells everything you need. I decided to put a little more effort into it and make it super clean, because for me the fun is in the project. So I want to be proud of what I did here. Should work really well. I'll post another video of everything assembled, welded in, and working.